Commander Sarah Chen knew the trap was coming. That's exactly why she walked right into it. The Corthan patrol vessel loomed ahead, its crystalline hull refracting starlight in impossible patterns. Her small merchant ship's engines hummed steadily as she maintained course, ignoring the warning signals flooding her communications array. Behind her, Marcus and Raj sat in silence, their breathing steady and controlled. They all knew their roles. Unidentified vessel, you have entered restricted Corthan space. The alien transmission crackled through her speakers. Power down your engines and prepare for boarding. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The Corthans were nothing if not predictable. Their empire had expanded rapidly across 3 sectors in the past decade, their technological superiority making them arrogant. They never expected resistance, especially not from seemingly helpless human merchants who had accidentally strayed into their territory. "Please," Sarah transmitted back, letting fear color her voice. "We're just traders. Our navigation system must have malfunctioned. We'll turn back immediately." The Corthan ship's tractor beam engaged exactly as expected, bathing her vessel in pale blue light. As her ship was slowly pulled toward the larger vessel, Sarah caught glimpses of the Corthans through their crystalline hull, tall, elegant beings with iridescent skin and multiple arms, their movements precise and deliberate. They didn't wear armor. They never did. Why would they? No species had successfully resisted them in over 50 years. "Marcus Raj," Sarah said quietly. "Remember, we need to make this look good, but not too good. We're scared merchants, not trained operatives." The boarding was swift and efficient. 6 Corthan warriors teleported directly into her cargo hold, their bodies briefly becoming translucent before solidifying. Their crystalline weapons hummed with barely contained energy. "Humans," the lead Corthan's voice resonated oddly, as if speaking through layers of glass. "You have violated sovereign space. You will be detained for processing." Sarah raised her hand slowly, letting them tremble slightly. "Please, we didn't know. We can pay a fine." The stun blast caught her in the chest, sending her sprawling. Through half-closed eyes, she saw Marcus and Raj receive similar treatment. Perfect. The Corthans weren't needlessly cruel, but they never took chances with potential prisoners. As consciousness faded, Sarah heard the Corthans discussing their catch in their native tongue. They had no way of knowing that humans had long since cracked their language's basic patterns. More importantly, they had no way of knowing that this capture was exactly what Earth's Special Operations Command had planned for months. 3 more for the Omega facility, one Corthan said. "These humans seem particularly hardy. They may last longer than the others." Sarah let darkness take her, but not before allowing herself another small smile. The Corthans were about to learn why taking human prisoners was a very, very bad idea. She awoke in a cell that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal, its faces refracting light in hypnotic patterns. A force field hummed at the entrance, its energy signature unlike anything human science had yet achieved. Sarah lay still, cataloging every detail while pretending to remain unconscious. The facility was massive. She could feel the subtle vibrations of enormous machinery through the floor. The air had a sterile quality, tinged with an odd metallic taste that suggested advanced atmospheric processing. Through the force field, she caught glimpses of other cells, most containing various alien species she didn't recognize. "The human female is awake," a Corthan voice observed clinically. "Vital signs indicate unusual resilience to the stun effects." Sarah opened her eyes slowly, playing the part of the confused prisoner. 2 Corthans stood outside her cell, their iridescent skin shifting colors as they moved. They wore what appeared to be scientific attire rather than military gear, exactly what she'd been hoping to see. Where am I?" she managed, her voice weak. "Please, there must be some mistake." The Corthans didn't respond directly. One made a series of complex gestures with its multiple arms, and data streams appeared in the air before it. Subject displays expected stress responses, but underlying physiological readings are anomalous. Recommend immediate transfer to deep testing. Sarah let fear show on her face, but beneath the act, she was counting corridors, noting security patterns, mapping every detail of what she could see. Somewhere in this facility was the reason why no prisoner had ever escaped. Somewhere in this facility was the secret that had made the Korthan Empire suddenly leap centuries ahead in technological development. And now, humans were finally inside. Through the force field, she caught a glimpse of Marcus being led down a corridor by more scientific staff. He stumbled slightly. A signal. He'd seen something important. Raj was nowhere in sight, which meant he was likely already being processed deeper in the facility. The plan was in motion. The Korthans thought they were testing humans. They didn't realize that humans were actually testing them. Begin preliminary scanning, one of the scientists ordered. The cell's crystal walls began to pulse with soft light, and Sarah felt a slight tingling sensation across her skin. She didn't resist. Not yet. Every scan they performed gave her more information about their technology, and Earth needed that data desperately. The Korthan Empire had appeared seemingly overnight, their ships and weapons unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Their expansion had been ruthless, but not cruel. They simply saw other species as inferior, fit only for study and experimentation. Humanity had held them off so far through sheer determination and unpredictability, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the Korthans' superior technology overwhelmed Earth's defenses. Unless, of course, someone could discover the source of that technology. Someone who could infiltrate their most secure facility by allowing themselves to be captured. Someone who could find out why the facility was called Omega and why no prisoner had ever returned from it. Sarah closed her eyes, pretending to flinch from the scanning lights. In reality, she was activating the microscopic quantum transmitter embedded in her nervous system, sending the first burst of data back to Earth. The game was on. The Korthans had no idea that they'd just invited a wolf into their laboratory. And this wolf had very sharp teeth indeed. The scanning went on for hours, or what felt like hours in the timeless crystal prison. Sarah had counted 17 different types of energy signatures, each one more sophisticated than the last. The Korthans were thorough. She had to give them that. A sudden change in the force field's harmonic frequency caught her attention. 2 new Korthan scientists entered, their skin patterns indicating a higher rank than the previous observers. One carried what appeared to be a crystalline tablet, streams of data flowing across its surface like liquid light. The preliminary results are unexpected. The first Korthan said, its tone carrying an unfamiliar modulation. This human's cellular structure is actively adapting to our scanning frequencies. The second Korthan made a gesture of scientific interest, a ripple of color across its central arms. Impossible. No species has demonstrated such capabilities. Check the equipment calibration. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she smiled. The Korthans were seeing exactly what Earth's scientists had predicted they would see. Human adaptability, the trait that had helped humanity survive countless disasters and challenges, was something entirely foreign to the crystalline alien's rigid, structured worldview. A new sound drew her attention, the heavy footsteps of guard patrols passing her cell. Through the force field's distortion, she caught glimpses of other prisoners being moved. Some walked steadily, others were dragged. None returned. The scientists continued their discussion, unaware that their prisoner understood every word. Transfer her to Chamber 0, the senior Korthan ordered. Full spectrum analysis. Priority Alpha. The force field dissolved, replaced instantly by a containment field that wrapped around Sarah like a second skin. As they led her through the facility's crystalline corridors, she maintained her facade of fearful compliance while memorizing every turn, every security checkpoint, every potential weakness. Chamber 0 turned out to be a vast laboratory space that seemed to stretch forever, its boundaries lost in a crystalline haze. Dozens of examination stations filled the room, each occupied by a different alien species being subjected to various tests. The air hummed with energy, and Sarah's skin tingled from the sheer amount of unknown technology surrounding her. They secured her to an examination platform that immediately began to reconfigure itself around her body. Crystal formations grew and shifted, creating a cocoon of scanning equipment. This was going to hurt, but pain was information too. Begin deep tissue analysis, one scientist ordered. Full cellular mapping. The first wave of energy felt like fire in her veins. Sarah didn't have to fake her scream. But through the pain, she focused. The quantum transmitter in her nervous system was recording everything, sending bursts of data through subspace to waiting receivers light years away. Through tears of genuine pain, she saw something that made everything worth it. In an adjacent chamber, partially hidden behind crystalline walls, stood a massive machine unlike anything she'd seen before. Its core pulsed with a familiar energy signature, the same energy that powered Corthan ships and weapons. More importantly, she saw Marcus being led toward that chamber, his eyes meeting hers for a fraction of a second. A tiny nod confirmed he'd seen it too. This was what they'd come for. The source of the Corthan's technological leap. The examination continued for what felt like days. They tested her responses to various energy fields, her cellular regeneration rates, her neural patterns. Each test seemed to confuse them more, their scientific certainty giving way to something Sarah had never expected to see in a Corthan: uncertainty. The genetic structure is unlike anything in our database, one scientist reported. It shows signs of thousands of micro-adaptations, accumulated over generations of survival in hostile conditions. Another Corthan reviewed the data streams. This explains why their world has resisted integration. Their ability to adapt, it violates fundamental principles of ordered development. Sarah almost laughed at that. Ordered development. Of course, that would be how the Corthan saw evolution, a structured, predictable process. They couldn't comprehend the chaos of natural selection, the brutal efficiency of adapt or die that had shaped humanity over millions of years. A sudden commotion from the mysterious chamber caught everyone's attention. Alarms began to sound, not the harsh blare she'd expected, but a crystalline chiming that seemed to resonate through the facility's very structure. Containment breach in Chamber Alpha. The announcement came in both Corthan and several other languages. Unknown energy signature detected. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures. Sarah allowed herself a genuine smile this time. Right on schedule. Whatever Raj had managed to do in the depths of the facility was working. Phase 2 was about to begin. The Corthans were about to learn another fundamental truth about humans. Adaptability wasn't just about surviving hostile conditions. It was about turning those conditions to your advantage. As chaos erupted around her, Sarah felt the containment field fluctuate. The Corthans were so focused on the breach that they didn't notice their test subject's restraints weakening. They didn't notice her muscles tensing, preparing. They didn't notice because they'd never had a prisoner plan for this moment. They'd never had a prisoner who wasn't really a prisoner at all. The facility's crystal walls began to pulse with warning lights, their patterns increasingly erratic. Sarah watched the Corthan scientists rush to secure their equipment, their movements becoming less precise, less controlled. Fear, she realized. They were experiencing fear. Good. They were about to experience a lot more of it. The lights went out. In the darkness, Sarah moved like a ghost. The Corthan's crystalline technology had one fundamental weakness. It relied on light, on precise patterns and frequencies. Without it, their sensors were blind. But humans had evolved from creatures that hunted in the dark. Emergency lighting struggled to activate, casting weak prismatic patterns across the chamber. Sarah could hear the Corthan scientists calling to each other, their voices carrying unfamiliar notes of distress. The power fluctuations weren't random. Raj had done his job perfectly. She found her first weapon exactly where she'd noted it earlier, a crystalline tool that the scientists had used for molecular restructuring. In her hands, it became something else entirely. The Corthans had never considered their scientific instruments could be weapons. They were about to learn otherwise. A shadow moved to her left. Marcus, free from his restraints, moving with practiced silence. They didn't need words. 3 months of preparation had synchronized their movements perfectly. While the Corthans scrambled to restore power, the humans were already executing their real mission. Chamber Alpha containment failing. The announcement echoed through the facility. Unknown energy signature expanding. All non-essential personnel evacuate immediately. Sarah smiled in the darkness. Raj wasn't just disrupting power. He was introducing chaos into their perfectly ordered systems. The quantum transmitter in her nervous system had been sending more than data back to Earth. It had been receiving instructions too, including the viral code that was now corrupting the facility's crystalline networks. A Corthan security team burst into the chamber, their weapons humming with stored energy. But in the shifting shadows and erratic light, their usual precision was compromised. They moved too rigidly, too predictably, their tactics designed for ordered environments and compliant prisoners. The first guard went down without a sound, Sarah's improvised weapon disrupting the crystalline patterns in its armor. The second spun toward the sound, but Marcus was already there, using the Corthan's own momentum against it. In the chaos, none of them noticed the other prisoners beginning to stir, watching, learning. The human test subjects are loose. One scientist managed to transmit before Sarah's weapon shattered his communication crystal. They're not behaving according to predicted patterns. Of course they weren't. The Corthans had studied human biology, human cellular structure, human neural patterns, but they hadn't studied human history. They hadn't learned about guerrilla warfare, about resistance movements, about the human capacity for turning oppression into opportunity. Through the crystalline walls, Sarah caught glimpses of other chambers, other laboratories. The power fluctuations were spreading, and with them, confusion and fear began to ripple through the facility. The perfect order of Omega was beginning to crack. "Sarah," Marcus called out, his voice low but urgent. "The central chamber. Something's happening." She turned toward the mysterious chamber they'd glimpsed earlier. The massive machine at its heart was pulsing erratically, its energy signature fluctuating wildly. Through the chaos, Sarah began to understand what she was seeing. It wasn't just a power source, it was something far more significant. The chamber's walls were lined with crystal matrices, each one containing what looked like frozen patterns of light. But they weren't just patterns, they were memories, experiences, knowledge. The Corthans hadn't just been experimenting on their prisoners. They'd been extracting and storing their consciousness. "This is how they did it," Sarah breathed. "This is how they advanced so quickly. They're not just studying other species, they're consuming them, taking their knowledge, their innovations, their evolutionary advantages." A high-pitched tone filled the air, and Sarah's quantum transmitter burned hot against her spine. Raj's signal. He found something in the facility's deeper levels, something that couldn't wait. The plan had been to free as many prisoners as possible, to cause enough chaos to cover their extraction of vital intelligence. But now, "Marcus," she called out, "change of plans. We're not just gathering intelligence anymore. This facility, what they're doing here, it can't be allowed to continue." He nodded grimly, already understanding. "Total shutdown." "Total shutdown," she confirmed. "But first, we free everyone. These aren't just prisoners anymore. They're witnesses. The galaxy needs to know what the Corthans have been doing here." The facility's crystal walls shuddered as another power surge rolled through them. In the adjacent cells, prisoners of a dozen different species were starting to realize their containment fields were weakening. Sarah could see it in their eyes, the first spark of hope, of resistance. The Corthans had built Omega to be perfect, ordered, controlled. They'd never considered that by bringing together the survivors of a dozen conquered species, they were actually creating something else, an army. Sarah raised her makeshift weapon, its crystalline edge humming with repurposed energy. "Let's show them why you should never put humans in a cage," she said, and struck the first cell's control panel. The revolution was about to begin, And the Corthans were about to learn another human trait they'd failed to study: the capacity for righteous fury. The facility erupted into chaos as containment fields failed in cascading waves. Prisoners emerged from their cells, some stumbling, others racing forward with desperate energy. Sarah watched as species that had been enemies for generations united in their desire for freedom. Through her quantum transmitter, Raj's signal pulsed with increasing urgency. Something in the lower levels had him spooked, and Raj didn't spook easily. "They're coming," a voice hissed from the shadows. A Nexian, its serpentine body coiled in readiness, pointed toward the main corridor with one of its sensory appendages. The elite guards. Sarah could hear them now, the rhythmic crystalline chime of heavy combat armor. The Corthan elite weren't scientists playing at security. They were warriors, and they were about to show why the Empire had conquered so many worlds. "Marcus," Sarah called out, "get these people to the secondary labs. Show them how to disable the scanning equipment. We need every piece of evidence we can salvage." She turned to the Nexian. "Can you still detect energy patterns?" The alien's sensory nodes flickered. "Yes. The experiments enhanced my sensitivity." "Good. I need you to guide others to the power conduits. Hit anything that looks important." The Nexian's mouthparts shifted in what might have been a smile before it slithered away, already gathering other prisoners. The first elite guard rounded the corner, its crystalline armor refracting emergency lighting into dazzling patterns. Sarah had studied their combat footage, but seeing one in person was different. They moved like liquid light, each motion precise and deadly. But precision had a weakness. Sarah didn't move like liquid light. She moved like a human who'd learned to fight in the dirt and darkness of a dozen worlds. The guard's energy blade hummed through the space where she should have been, meeting nothing but air as she rolled under its strike. The improvised weapon in her hands shouldn't have been able to penetrate Corthan battle armor. But Sarah hadn't aimed for the armor. She'd aimed for the joints, the small gaps where crystalline plates met. The guard stumbled, its perfect rhythm disrupted. That was all the opening the watching prisoners needed. They swarmed forward, dozens of species working in instinctive coordination. What they lacked in training, they made up for in desperate fury and sheer numbers. "Sarah," Marcus's voice cut through the din. "We've got problems. The central chamber, it's going into some kind of emergency lockdown." She fought her way to his position, using the chaos as cover. Through the crystalline walls, she could see the massive consciousness extraction machine beginning to pulse with intense energy. Data streams flickered through the surrounding crystal matrices, faster than before. "They're trying to save their research," she realized. "Download everything before we can destroy it." Her quantum transmitter burned against her spine. Raj's signal was now a constant, urgent pulse. A new alarm joined the crystalline chorus, its tone deeper, more resonant. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with it. Sarah watched in horror as the consciousness extraction machine's energy signature began to change, its usual ordered patterns becoming something wild and unstable. "Everyone back," she shouted. "Clear the central chamber." The explosion came not with fire, but with light. Pure, searing light that threw crystalline shadows across every surface. When Sarah's vision cleared, she saw that the chamber's walls had partially melted, revealing something behind them that made her blood run cold. Tanks. Hundreds of them, stretching into darkness. Each contained a suspended figure, their bodies connected to the facility's systems by threads of crystalline energy. But they weren't just being kept in stasis. They were being transformed. "Gods below," the Nexian whispered, its sensory nodes flaring. "They're combining them, taking the strongest traits from each species, trying to create something else." Sarah's quantum transmitter suddenly screamed with data. Raj had found something even worse in the lower levels. The facility wasn't just a research station. It wasn't even just a consciousness extraction center. It was a prototype. "They're building an army," she breathed. "Not just stealing knowledge. They're trying to create the perfect soldiers, combining the best traits of every species they've conquered. A new sound cut through the chaos, the heavy thrum of massive machinery activating. Through the melted gaps in the chamber walls, Sarah could see more tanks beginning to pulse with energy. Warning signals flashed across nearby control surfaces. Emergency protocols engaged. The facility's announcement system chimed. Initiating final phase. All successful fusion subjects prepare for activation. The tanks were opening. The transformed prisoners inside them began to move, their bodies twisted into something that was neither fully organic nor fully crystalline. Their eyes opened, glowing with the same energy that powered the facility. "Marcus," Sarah's voice was steadied despite the horror building in her chest. "Get everyone out. Now, use the maintenance shafts we mapped. Get to the upper levels." "What about you?" Raj found something in the lower levels, something important enough to risk breaking communication silence. "I need to know what it is." She checked her makeshift weapon's power levels. "And someone needs to make sure none of these things make it out of this facility." The transformed creatures were fully awake now, pulling themselves from their tanks with unnatural grace. They moved like Corthan elite guards, but twisted wrong, their bodies housing impossible combinations of evolutionary traits. Sarah couldn't let them escape, couldn't let the Corthans perfect this technology. The galaxy was facing something far worse than just an expansionist empire. It was facing the potential extinction of all natural species, replaced by these engineered horrors. Her quantum transmitter pulsed one final time, and in that burst of data, she finally understood what Raj had found. Why this facility was called Omega. What the Corthans were really planning. This wasn't just about creating soldiers. This was about remaking all life in the galaxy according to their vision of perfection. Sarah touched the transmitter, sending one last burst of data to the waiting receivers light years away. Then she turned toward the darkness below, where Raj was waiting, where the facilities. Sarah raised her weapon. "I'll buy you time." The fight that followed was like nothing in human combat history. The hybrid creatures had every physical advantage: strength, speed, natural weapons honed by eons of evolution. But Sarah had something they didn't: choice. The freedom to act unpredictably, to make decisions they couldn't compute. She didn't try to match their strength. Instead, she used their own power against them, letting their perfect attacks miss by millimeters, turning their coordination into a weakness. Each creature fought exactly as it was programmed to. And that was their fatal flaw. "Done." Raj's voice cut through the chaos. "Sarah, run." They sprinted for the exit as the crystal structure behind them began to pulse with wild, unstable energy. The hybrid creatures pursued, but their movements were becoming erratic, their perfect coordination falling apart as Raj's chaos code took hold. The facility's walls vibrated with increasing intensity. Crystal began to crack, order giving way to entropy. Sarah's quantum transmitter burned hot enough to sear her skin, overloading with the sheer volume of data being corrupted. They found Marcus and the surviving prisoners at the emergency dock, already preparing shuttles for launch. The former captives moved with desperate efficiency, helping each other aboard without regard for old species rivalries. "Tell me you have good news," Marcus said as they reached him. Sarah's grim smile was all the answer he needed. "How long until the shuttles are ready?" 2 minutes, maybe less. The facility's crystalline chorus had become a scream of shattering order. Through the dock's viewports, Sarah could see the corruption spreading. Perfect patterns dissolving into chaos, the very structure of Omega breaking down at a molecular level. They barely made it to the shuttles before the first major structural collapse. As they launched into space, Sarah watched through the viewport as the facility began to tear itself apart. Not with fire or explosion, but with the pure energy of entropy unleashed. The quantum transmitter gave one final pulse before burning out completely, its mission accomplished. The data they'd gathered, the evidence of what the Corthans had planned, it was already speeding toward Earth and a dozen other worlds. "Look," Raj said softly. The hybrid creatures were changing. Without the facility's control, without the Corthans' perfect order maintaining their engineered forms, they were reverting. Not to their original species, but to something new, something that had chosen its own path of evolution. Sarah watched as Omega collapsed in on itself, its perfect crystalline structure dissolving into chaos. The Corthans had tried to impose their vision of perfection on the galaxy. Instead, they'd learned why evolution favored adaptability over rigid order. The shuttle's communications array crackled to life. Messages from the other escaped prisoners, not just expressions of gratitude, but promises of alliance. The Corthans had unwittingly created exactly what they'd feared most: a coalition of species united against their vision of enforced perfection. As the last traces of Omega vanished into space, Sarah allowed herself to finally relax. The Corthans would learn about their failures soon enough, would learn that they'd made the mistake of thinking humans were just another species to be reformed, another set of traits to be harvested. They'd learn what every force in history that had tried to cage humanity had learned: that adaptability wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving in chaos, about turning opposition into opportunity. And most importantly, they'd learn why you should never, ever, give humans a reason to fight back. The stars stretched before them, infinite in their possibilities, and somewhere out there, the galaxy was about to change. Not according to the Corthans' perfect vision, but in the beautiful, chaotic way that free beings chose for themselves. Sarah smiled. The real evolution was just beginning. Deepest secrets lay hidden. It was time to end this. One way or another, Omega would fall. Last edited, the descent into Omega's lower levels felt like entering the heart of a dying star. Crystal walls pulsed with unstable energy, their usual ordered patterns fracturing into chaos. Sarah moved swiftly through the darkness, following Raj's signal as it grew stronger. Behind her, she could hear the transformed creatures pursuing, their movements a terrible hybrid of dozens of species' most lethal traits. But they were still bound by the Corthans' rigid programming, their actions predictable. Sarah wasn't. She found Raj in a vast chamber that seemed to extend forever into darkness. He stood before a massive crystalline structure, his hands moving across its surface with practiced precision. The quantum transmitter in her spine burned at the proximity to whatever he'd discovered. "About time," he said without looking up. "I found their core, the source of everything." Sarah approached, and the structure's purpose became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just a computer or a power source. It was a blueprint, a template for remaking all life in the galaxy. The Corthans, Raj explained, his voice tight with controlled fury. They're not just empire builders. They're architects. They think evolution is too messy, too chaotic. This facility, it's a prototype for what they want to do to every living thing in the galaxy. The crystal structure showed it all: plans for systematic species modification, forced evolution according to Corthan ideals of perfection. The hybrid creatures above weren't weapons, they were test runs. "How long?" Sarah asked. 5 years, maybe less. Once they perfect the process here, they'll begin full implementation. Every species, every world, remade according to their vision of order. A new alarm sounded, different from the others. Through the crystal walls, Sarah could see more tanks activating in distant chambers, more hybrids awakening. "They're starting mass activation," Raj said grimly. "The system's going into some kind of emergency preservation mode, trying to save its research before we can destroy it." Sarah's hand tightened on her weapon. "Can we shut it down?" "Better." Raj's fingers danced across the crystal surface. "I found a flaw in their perfect system. They're so focused on order, on control, they never considered that chaos might be necessary. That evolution needs randomness to work." Understanding dawned. "You're not just shutting it down. I'm introducing disorder. Random variables. Chaos." His smile was fierce. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. The power of unpredictability. The facility shuddered. Above them, Sarah could hear the sounds of combat. Marcus leading the escaped prisoners against their twisted counterparts. But it was a holding action. Everything hinged on what happened here, in this chamber. How long? 3 minutes to full implementation. Then, Rad's eyes met hers. "We'll need to run. Fast." A crystalline shriek cut through the air as the first of the hybrid creatures found them. It moved like liquid death, its form a nightmare fusion of a dozen deadly species. But its eyes, they held something unexpected. Fear. Sarah met its gaze and understood. The hybrids weren't just afraid of them. They were afraid of what they had become, of what the Corthans had made them into. 2 minutes, Raj called out.